Welcome into another mailbag edition of Fantasy Baseball. Today, Frank Stampfl joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. And today on the show, got some data, early returns on the new rules in spring training and how they're affecting things thus far. And of course, we'll get to your mailbag questions, Apple Podcast review, and some emails later on in the show. Let's start off with these early returns, what we've noticed on these new rules. And before we get into the actual data and stuff, I wanted to ask you guys how you feel about the pitch clock. I feel like we haven't actually talked about it yet. There's been lots of takes on Twitter and in the baseball world. Scott, we'll start with you. As of March 1st, the average game time in spring training was 2 hours and 39 minutes. So that's part of the goal that they want to achieve. But how do you feel as a fan watching the game with the pitch clock?
So I've only tuned into one spring game so far. But I did explicitly for that purpose. I wanted to see what it felt like to experience the pitch clock. And my gosh, I'd heard this from people who watched a lot of minor league games last year, that you don't even realize how much you're going to appreciate the pitch clock until you see it in action. And that's exactly the way I felt about it. The pace, it was almost like video game speed, you know? And just like you've seen a lot of these side-by-side comparisons on Twitter of there was one where a pitcher in this spring got through a whole inning and the time it took a pitcher last year to throw one pitch.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just the amount of dead time that becomes live time is it's really the sort of thing, like if you haven't seen a spring game yet, you need to, because it's going to change the experience of watching a baseball game on TV dramatically. And I think we're going to look back on this in 20 years and be like, this was the thing that saved baseball. Like that's how big of a change I think it is.
Chris, no surprise, the baseball purists are up in arms about the pitch clock, and
which is so silly. Because the thing that I keep going back to is this is what baseball was for such a long time. Like this morning, I was looking back. I went and watched there's a 1965 World Series game that Sandy Koufax started. And that's I searched for that just because I know the purists love Sandy Koufax. They think he's like the best ever. He's really good, not to take anything away from him. But you watch it and it's like, this is like 1965 Sandy Koufax. Like his arm is already destroyed. He's got 1 year left. He's laboring. And it's like 15 to 17 seconds between when he gets the ball back and when he throws, which is what we're aiming for here. I watched a 97 World Series game. Same thing. Livan Hernandez pitching game 1 in the 97 World Series. He gets the ball, 8 seconds between when he gets the ball back and when he throws. This is what baseball was. So the purists are just being reactionary. I feel like this isn't actually a principled stand against what baseball used to be. It's just they don't like a new thing. But this is aesthetically, as long as the pitch clock is not in your view, which it won't be in the actual games, it is in spring training, but that's just how the spring training thing works. It's going to look like baseball looked for 100 years before. And so my only thing is, as long as it doesn't lead to more injuries, I have no problem with it. I can see some situations where those high intensity postseason moments where the pitcher staring down the hitter, I could see losing some kind of drama in those moments, but who cares, right? And it's one of those things people always do people do just like they did with the DH. They're like, it takes away the strategy. And it's like, no, it introduces different strategy. Batters have to be in the box quicker. It's not taking away strategy. It's a different version of it. And I just, again, as long as there's no increase in injuries as a result of this, and the minor league data suggests that there won't be, or at least not a noticeable one, I have no problem with it. And I can't imagine anybody actually disliking this rule.
I think the principle that they're railing against is just the idea that baseball was always the sport that didn't have a timer compared to, football, basketball, basically every other. And so that I understand why that would upset the purest sensibilities. But what I've noticed, I mean, who are the most high-profile baseball purists out there. They're crusty old broadcasters, right? And what I've noticed, I've said I've only tuned in for one spring game. I've caught clips of others, and I've noticed that they're all like, while they may have disagreed with the idea in principle, when they actually experience what the pitch clock is doing to the experience of watching a game, they all seem pretty happy with it. I think it's the sort of thing where it's worse in your imagination, or maybe you don't appreciate the upsides of it in your imagination as much as you do once once it's reality.
I mean, hey, look, if I'm getting paid the same amount of money to work less, I'm going to be happy about it too.
Look, I can't speak for purists, but I would imagine it's not the aesthetic that they're worried about. It's clips like the one that Jeff Passan tweeted out last week, where it's bases loaded, there's 2 outs, the game is on the line, and it ends in a tie because it's spring training. But the inning ends because the batter wasn't in the box in time. Like something that
won't happen. That's why they're introducing it in spring training, to get everybody used to it. And the player in the moment is going to understand the stakes of that, and he's not going to goof around with it.
And there was there was a college game that had a similar situation. It was like bottom of the 9th, 2 outs, bases loaded, team's down 6-3, 3-2 count, and the guy doesn't step into the box quickly enough. It's a strikeout. Game ends. Like, that's a stupid way to end a game. I agree. Like, as a fan of sports, like, that's a dumb, but also just get in the box. Like, especially for the hitters, just get in the box. What are you doing? Like that, I have zero sympathy for a hitter who gets a strike in this situation, because you're not the one who has to do anything. Like, I can understand like a pitcher, like, man, I need a couple extra seconds to like that was a tough pitch. I feel a little weird. Like, I can see that. A batter, just step in the box, man. Like, that's...
Well, in the specific instance, I think he was in the box. He just wasn't looking at the pitcher. If I'm remembering it right, I actually saw it live. And, that seems a little more ticky-tack, but it's the sort of thing, like, if it's a problem, they'll adjust it.
Right, and I'm sure there will be a little more leeway. Like, this is one of those things, like, we always see this in football. Yep. In preseason, where like there's a point of emphasis and we're like, oh man, they're calling so many, and it's like, it's a point of emphasis in the preseason to get everybody used to it. Players will adjust, the umps will adjust. It'll probably be like the play clock in the NFL, where it's like, oh, it was on 0 for half a second. It's like they're gonna give them that half second on 0 in a big moment. I'm sure. Like, we're not gonna see Game 7 of the World Series decided by a called strike.
I hope not. Sure hope not. Let's talk about offense and the results that we've seen so far there. The shift affecting scoring and batting average. According to an article from ESPN, runs and batting average were both up through the first wave of games compared to spring training a year ago. Players hit 272 through February 28th with an average of 11.9 runs scored per game. That's obviously total. That's up from a batting average of 259 and 10.6 runs through the same period in 2022. So it's a very small sample size. I think we can update these numbers as we get further into spring training, but the early returns, batting average way up, 13 points, and run scoring is up as well. Steals. Jason Collette put out a fantastic thread on Twitter, and his final tweet showed that if this spring training stolen base attempt rate carries into the regular season, we will see a 25% increase in stolen base attempts this year, which is something we've talked about all off season. So we were pretty much bracing for this stolen.
That would actually be lower than the increase rate from the minor leagues last year, I believe. I think the increase was more like 50%, if I'm remembering correctly, from the minors.
I know
what MLB's line was that it would return, if there was a corresponding increase in the majors, it would return us to the standards for stolen bases that we haven't seen since the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Or
in 2012,
not that we haven't seen since the early 2000s, because actually the early 2010s were even higher, but it would return us to what we saw in the early 2000s. So using the year 2000, there were 2,924 stolen bases, 2,900 stolen bases in the year 2000. 1.25 times last year's steals total brings it to 3,107 stolen bases. So it would actually be close to 200 more steals than in the year 2000. So I think that's that's kind of what we were looking at and hoping for.
And I want to read the tea leaves on specific players that are making a note of this and they want to steal more. I know Tommy Edman was a name that we brought up right during the mock draft yesterday. And I saw an article from Jason Stark. The Braves say they want to go 40-40, like multiple hitters. They think could go 40-40. You know, the 40 home run part. A little
Acuna, I'm not sure who the other is.
Could.
Michael Harris has talent, but I don't know, 40-40. But the thing is, clearly they're putting an emphasis on they think they can run more. Michael Harris, and it wouldn't surprise me if Ozzie Albies or even Vaughn Grissom, these guys are athletic enough. So really want to pay attention to which players are saying that they want to run more. Chris, go ahead. I know you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, and you know, this is another one just from an aesthetic or strategy standpoint. There's also been a lot of talk like Wilson Contreras, I think, has led baseball since he got to the majors in pickoff attempts from the catcher. And like that's something that I think Sean Murphy talked about wanting to do more of, and that might be a way that teams try to get around this is try to, you know, use the catcher as a way to limit the running game more. So like it's another thing where this doesn't really matter as much for fantasy, but like it just increases or redistributes the onus on the different players around the field and changes the way the strategy works, but it's not necessarily removing strategy. If anything, this kind of limitation increases the strategy because now you have to think about when you're going to step off and when you're going to try to pick off. So I'm pretty much a fan of all the rules. I think it's all positive.
It's a really exciting time in baseball, I think. I know there are going to be frustrations as we work to adjust in fantasy, in particular, our expectations for certain baselines and the scarcities that exist in the game is going to change, and we're going to have to adjust on the fly. But I think the product is in every way going to improve.
I agree wholeheartedly. I love the changes that they're making, but from a fantasy perspective, I mean, my head is just spinning trying to figure out how can we actually project this? And I think we don't really know. Like we're seeing improvements already, but I think we're going to have to adjust on the fly, which you were just saying, Scott.
And that's the thing is that from a fantasy perspective, it just increases the uncertainty.
Yeah.
And there's already a relatively high baseline of level of uncertainty in fantasy baseball relative to other sports in particular, but also the modern era of baseball has created an a higher level of baseline uncertainty with not just rule changes, but the changes in the offensive environment with the baseball. And, you know, this year we've got Toronto and who's the other team changing their park dimensions?
Tigers.
Detroit. The Tigers. So like uncertainty it's not necessarily a bad thing because it could create a more fun game. It just uncertainty is bad for fantasy because it makes it harder to predict. And so, you know, next year we'll have a better idea of what to expect from, you know, these rule changes and how it'll impact and what types of players will be impacted, and we'll know a little more. But right now we're heading into 2022 or 2023, with uncertainty about what the environment's going to look like on a macro level, and then a few teams there's a micro level, and so it's interesting times. It's a little frustrating as a fantasy analyst. It would be nice if next year we could go into the season saying, hey, this is the type of game we are going to be playing, because you're playing against your opponents, but you're also playing against the game. And so it's an interesting situation to be in as fantasy players and fantasy analysts for sure.
Wouldn't that be something, Chris? Don't hold your breath. That's all I've got to say. Let's get into your mailbag questions. Thank you all so much for all of the questions. They are flooding in. We have so many of them coming in. I just have a few requests. If you're leaving an Apple Podcast review question, please try and keep it strategy or some kind of player focus, because we've got a lot of keeper questions, and you know, moving forward, we're going to try and get away from keeper questions on the mailbag, but you can send the keeper questions to the email address, fantasybaseball@cbsi.com, and I'll try and answer as many of those individually as I possibly can. But again, moving forward on this podcast, we want to focus on specific strategy or maybe certain players, things like that, from a fantasy baseball perspective. Let's get into your email questions. This first one is from Wes in a head-to-head 5x5 daily category snake draft. quality starts and OBP instead of average and whip. Okay, that's interesting. 10-team, 3-person keeper league. I would like to know, what is your draft strategy for a daily lineup league? Should you use any bench spots for hitters, or should it be reserved for exclusively pitchers to ensure volume in that space? Also, how does value change? Would someone like Shane Bieber be more valuable than Francisco Lindor?
So in the specific instance of what you're talking about here with the change from quality start, from whip to quality start, especially, my typical advice for a daily lineups league for pitching would be, you want a lot of pitchers, but also it's easier to get away with just having more middle relief and setup men. Not so in this instance, because now you've got 4 counting stats in the pitcher categories instead of 3, and only one of those counting stats benefits relievers. So there's not really much reason to have middle relievers and setup men on your bench in this instance. This is one where it probably does make more sense to load up on streaming starting pitchers. And the thing is, the problem with loading up on streaming starting pitchers typically is you run the risk of wrecking 2 different ratio stats with bad starts. Well, here it's just ERA. So like loading up on even bad starting pitchers, their chances of getting a quality start are pretty low. But now all of a sudden, this heavily favors starting pitchers because they're the only ones who are getting quality starts.
And it heavily favors.
They're not the only ones getting wins, but most wins are going to come from starting pitchers. So I think it does change the balance. In your typical daily league, I think the Marmol strategy is a perfectly viable option. In this one, I don't think that's the case.
And I think it's more likely to even punt saves in a format like this, where where quality starts is a category and wins. You're much more likely to get those
I guess
starters.
I guess Chris was saying, I think the best way to put it is bad starting pitchers will hurt you less. You still obviously don't want bad starting pitchers, but because quality starts and wins are in there, I guess both quality start and wins. Gosh,
yeah. I mean, I do wonder if he
meant of the world.
Yeah,
load up on innings eaters. Guys who are going to go deep into games, which are generally higher ranked in head-to-head points leagues. So maybe look at those rankings for starting pitchers.
The Mount Rushmore, Scott. I mean, if we're talking about Miles Michaelis and Merrill Kelly and Tyler Anderson and Martin Perez, I mean, those are the innings eater types right there. And
the problem with Martin Perez is whip, and whip doesn't matter. So
and even Jose Barrios, I think, is someone who makes a lot of sense in that format as well. Also, from a daily lineup perspective, I've heard some form of this question before as well. Picking up hitters that have certain splits, like, lefties that only play against right-handed pitchers. Hey, you can throw Jock Peterson in there whenever he's facing a righty, and you can just leave him on your bench whenever they're facing a lefty, or streaming Rockies hitters whenever they're at home, and then just benching them whenever they're on the road. Is that something you guys would pay attention to?
I mean, you could do it some, but you only have so many bench spots. And so you wouldn't want a lineup full of splits guys.
Yeah. And there aren't that many Rockies players worth doing that with anyway. We potentially just lost Brandon Rogers for the season. So there's one more who is, how many guys would you even want to play that game with the Rockies?
Not many. And the ones that you're drafting to be in your lineup, they're probably not ever leaving, right? Like guys like Chris Bryant or something.
Charlie Blackmon
maybe
becomes more valuable in that. But again, like Scott said, you probably you only have so many bench spots, and you probably want to use them for pitchers in this instance.
All right. This next question is from Dan. Dear Beavis, Butthead, and Stewart.
Well, I'm going to assume Stewart is someone from Beavis and Butthead.
It's probably a safe assumption. I
Didn't
don't know Beavis and Butthead that well.
Didn't it make a comeback recently? Yeah.
Yes, on what's that streaming service of ours?
Paramount Plus.
Paramount Plus. Yes.
You're doing a great job, Scott.
I was trying to be company man, but No, I know King of the Hill much better than Beavis and Butthead, so I don't know who Stewart is.
Fair enough. Last season, you guys were high on the following players who didn't quite break out. Who are you still buying / not buying from this list? Why or why not? So Brendan Rodgers, not looking too good right now with the injury. Other names here: Patrick Sandoval, Joe Adell, Jared Kelnick, Riley Green, Trevor Rogers, Alec Boehm, and Jesus Sanchez.
I'm still pretty high on a handful of these guys. I think Patrick Sandoval still has a lot of really interesting tools. Obviously, he didn't have quite the breakout we hoped for, but
I read an interesting note about him this spring. Patrick
Let's hear it.
Sandoval lost the feel for his changeup during a stretch last year, which forced him to rely on his slider more and develop it, so that it became a pretty good swing and miss pitch. His swing and strike rate was still great. It just wasn't as good as 2021. But the changeup has looked good this spring, and he says he wants to throw it more than last year.
So I mean, really, just like let's just be slider changeup for Patrick Sandoval. Throw the fastball. Like he's one of those guys who I wonder. Like I typically think most pitchers should throw their four seam fastball more than their sinker. You don't usually get much better results on balls in play with the sinker, so you'd rather just chase the whiffs. In his case, his four seam fastball is so bad that I kind of think he should just be like a sinker changeup slider guy, and sinker he should throw like 30% of the time.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say like. Changeup's only good because you throw a fastball, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, in his case, like he's already only throwing his fastballs like 36% of the time total anyway. So it's not asking too much. I do think like the slider and changeup both looked really, really good last season. He got really good results on the slider. So I still think there's a lot to like about Patrick Sandoval. So I'm still in on him as a, kind of mid to late round guy. Adell, I think Joe Adell needs to change the scenery. I don't know if they're ever going to trade him, but he's someone who probably just needs to play every day. He seems to be in his head as a fielder, especially, which makes it hard for him to get in the field. So I don't know about him. I would like to see it though. But Riley Green, I'm still definitely in on. He's someone I'm drafting in pretty much every league. I have him way ahead of consensus. So I can still take him in like the 12th round and get him a lot. Rogers, we all like quite a bit.
Yep. My sleepers.
Boehm, not as much, but it's a profile that I like to target because he hits the ball hard. He's got pretty good plate discipline. He just needs to elevate it more. So yeah, I still think there's some, and I actually did like Brendan Rodgers a lot more. I like Brendan Rodgers quite a bit until this shoulder issue, unfortunately.
So Kelnick has hit 3 home runs this spring. His exit velocity readings have been ridiculous. The most recent was off a left-hander and hit the opposite way, which it takes a special amount of power to hit a home run the opposite way now that the juice ball's gone. He's had big springs before. Not sure how many breaking balls he's seeing right now, and that's been his biggest problem. But nobody wants Jared Kelnick, and I don't know, maybe if he keeps performing this spring, it'll change, but his ADP's outside the top 300. Everybody's just out on him, and he's 23 years old. He was arguably the top prospect in baseball 2 years ago. If he was going in the middle rounds, I'd get it. Like, I don't know that I want to try that again, but when he's basically free, I don't understand the downside, and I've gotten so much grief on Twitter for expressing any amount of optimism for Jared Kelnick. And it's like, you can't, if the investment is so little, what is the downside to drafting him? There's no downside. Just take him and see how it goes. If he's batting, 150 at the end of April, okay, move on.
Like we talked about yesterday, most of the guys you're drafting in that range, you're going to be dropping. Or, yeah, no, if it's like 25th round, most of the guys you're drafting there are going to be dropped anyway. So take guys with upside. And if Jared Kelnick doesn't work out, you'll pick up someone on waivers who can at least be a replacement level player.
Like even now, the comments that are showing up in the live stream, they're like, I'm not saying Kelnick is good. I'm just saying he's free and we still don't know what he could be.
Yeah.
Last name that we haven't mentioned here is Jesus Sanchez. I don't have much faith in Jesus Sanchez, but he's kind of fallen into that Willie Calhoun bucket for me where I don't have confidence, but I always love him. and I'll always be rooting for him. So I hope it works out. And he's still young enough where I guess it could, but we haven't really seen much. Let's take our first break, and we'll get to more questions here on Fantasy Baseball Today.
War has descended upon this place.
Mark my words, this fight ain't over. Where I'm going is dangerous.
Let's look death in the eye then, shall we?
What happened?
Nothing's happened.
1923. All episodes now streaming exclusively on Paramount Plus.
Welcome back into Fantasy Baseball Today, answering your email questions. This one's from Spencer. Hi, Marco, Donnie, and Nafi
Perez.
Yeah, that would be my,
That's the only Nafi I know. Former Rockies shortstop. Donnie and Marco Scudero.
That was the thought I had, yeah.
But I don't know what the connection is. They're infielders. Donnie Darko. No, I don't know who Donnie is.
Yeah, I've got nothing.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Donnie Murphy.
After reading the Jason Stark article in The Athletic detailing MLB's crackdown on the sticky stuff plan for 2023, yet another factor to worry about, I am having a Frank-esque panic attack about random/known pitchers being affected. Could you guys go over the pitchers who were affected the most in the silky, smooth, and not sticky summer of 2021? I remember Darvish and Garrett Cole, Tyler Glass now destroying his arm, but were there more?
So this is a tough question because correlation does not equal causation. And just because someone had a bad stretch in the middle of the 2021 season doesn't necessarily mean that it was because of sticky stuff. So I tend to not put too much weight on this one on an individual pitcher basis. Like, yeah, it's possible Garrett Cole will be affected or you Darvish, but I tend to think they'll figure it out just like they did. You know, like,
well,
if
how did they figure it out?
But like
Chris?
Garrett Cole, even in the 2021 season, did get better as that summer went on.
A lot of them did.
Was it finding new ways around the rule? Was it MLB being laxer, or was it just like it took some time to get used to? I don't know the answer to that. I know there is an answer. I just don't think it's a knowable answer.
I think it'll impact big strikeout guys, like high-end types more. It'll help create less of a gap between them and everybody else. If there is an impact, that's what I think it'll be. But in picking out individual pitchers, one I will say is James Karinchak.
Yeah,
it seemed like he was totally ruined without it, and then suddenly he was fixed again last year. But he's not obviously a high stature fantasy pitcher to begin with.
And there were still a lot of videos last year, I remember, of him either constantly touching his hair, or there looked like maybe there was like Vaseline on the back of his pants or something like that he kept going to between pitches. So it feels like they moved away from cracking down on it last year, but we'll see. Just another factor in fantasy baseball.
Checked the hand, I think, the same inning every time or something like that.
Yeah, but they weren't really looking.
Clearly ways to exploit the check.
Yes. This one's from Greg. Dear Tommy, Jason, and Billy.
Those are very common names.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
I have a very strong guess. I'm pretty sure these are Power Rangers.
Okay.
We're all Power Rangers, yes.
Blue Ranger, Red Ranger, Green Ranger. Makes sense, right?
Later, the White Ranger was Tommy. I don't know why I know this much about Power Rangers.
Scott, it's all right by me. I was a huge Power Ranger fan growing up. I think that's probably the only reason why I know this. Have you guys ever done a league with left field, center field, and right field designations rather than the general outfield designations? Our points league is considering doing it this year as a way to make it a little deeper. Not like outfield isn't bad enough, huh? Since we currently have the standard 3 outfield spots. What are your general thoughts on this type of league? And then ask if there's any players that stand out. I say this every offseason. I've always wanted to play in a league like this. I've never done it. I think it's very interesting. I mean, there's some outfielders that bounce around between different outfield spots. So it's like, how do you designate? But
no, just
maybe we should make
same way you designate eligibility anywhere else.
Maybe we should make the For the People League. Left field, center field, right field.
My guess is left field would be left field would be the weakest. but I'm not actually confident in
It
that.
shouldn't be, because it is one of the two easiest positions to play. So you'd think, you know, they'd hide bats out there. But yeah, it has kind of become weak. Maybe that's going to change now that there's more of a premium on defense again and more of a premium on power again. But as things currently stand, I think right field is absolutely the strongest, followed by center field and then left. But yeah, I mean, it's going to.
Okay.
I think the scarcities that are being introduced, especially given the current state of the outfield, is not going to be worth it. I don't.
Last year, left field collectively had the highest OPS of the three outfield positions.
Okay.
Center field had the lowest, but there were a lot more stolen bases at center field. Right field had more home runs, so I don't know.
That makes sense off the top of my head. Like, Judge plays right field. Obviously, they get a huge bonus there. Center field, a lot of the times on bad teams, we'll just see a good defender out there who can't really do anything offensively. And then in left field, like Scott was just saying, you might hide someone there, but they're a good bat. So you just want to find a way to get their bat in the lineup. So
what's kind of funny, unrelated but kind of related, third base had the second highest collective OPS last season.
Maybe collective OPS isn't the best way to measure this.
But it's just fair. I just find that interesting. 725 OPS for left field and third base. First base was 746. DH 710. I think that's stupid. I think teams are misusing their DH spot, but hey, that's been a long running trend. DH used to be by far the best position in terms of collective OPS. It no longer is, and that's a change.
I think with the introduction of the DH in the National League, yes, it created more jobs, but it also put a lot of worse hitters into those jobs. So that's why we've kind of seen it drag down a little bit. This one's from Peter. One of my secret sleepers that I haven't heard, I hope your league mates are not listening to this, anyone talk about, is Trey Mancini. If you take a look at his expected home run total at Wrigley Field for last year, it was 37. How accurate do you expect this statistic to be? I hope you say it's accurate, because I've been grabbing him all week.
So I think there may be a mistake here.
Yeah.
That's Cincinnati.
I didn't fact check this.
Yeah. His expected home runs in Cincinnati were 37. Expected home runs in Chicago, 21.
Oh, really? It's changed that. Because I've noticed that for the Cubs, expected home run stats for most players is pretty high. And I thought, just looking at the overall park factors for Wrigley Field, Wrigley Field is such an oddity that, because of how much influence the wind has and what direction it's blowing on what particular day. And it can be a huge home run park at times, but it can be a stifling home run park at times too. And so I wonder if the inputs account for all of that.
Yeah.
I don't really know what the inputs are, so I can't say for sure, but I think maybe the effect could be exaggerated for some players, though, as you're pointing out, not specifically Mancini. Mancini had a great home run number going to Houston last year, and it didn't pan out. I don't know. I don't know that it's there for him anymore. I'm not ruling it out, but in the same range, there are a lot more players. There are a lot of other players I can get more excited about, especially since he's a liability defensively. And at some point, Matt Mervis is going to be put in the mix. And so I don't know how much job security he's going to have either.
Yeah, he's more of a 15-teamer for me. I don't really reach a point in 12-team leagues where I think about him, but I could see snagging him as a corner infielder or utility option in a 15-team league. Sure.
It's pretty clear to me that 2019 was the outlier for Trey Mancini with the juice ball when he hit 35 home runs. And
was for a lot of players.
He's dealt with a lot since then, obviously with a cancer diagnosis and then making it back into baseball. So it's awesome to see that. But last year he doesn't impact the ball as hard as other players. And he kind of sold out for fly balls last year. He changed his launch angle and it led to a lower BABIP and a lower batting average. So it seems like this is kind of the player he is, like 250-ish, 15 to 20 home runs. I guess there's still a chance he can outperform that, but I probably wouldn't put much stock into it. Sorry, Peter. Let's promote one thing before we get to your Apple Podcast review questions. The CBS Sports Fantasy Baseball Commissioner product lets you run your league your way with endless ways to customize your scoring, roster, schedule, and more. With CBS Sports Commissioner, you can cut out the loopholes and arguments and play exactly how your league wants to. If you're watching us live, you've got the Scott White Dynasty League salary cap draft coming up tonight. Very excited for it. We had a Roto mock draft just the other day, which we did live and worked out seamlessly. So yeah, just another reason to sign up for the commissioner product. You could set up custom rules, Roto, head-to-head points or categories, salary cap or snake draft, keepers, contracts, draft pick trading, and multiple matchups per period. So step up to the big leagues this season. Visit cbssports.com/FBT to get a special offer when you start a new commissioner league today. Again, that's cbssports.com/FBT. Let's get to your Apple Podcast review questions. A lot of these are going to be keeper questions, so I think we can move pretty quick through those. And I think I have like 25 of these on the rundown. So let's see how many we can get to. From JB Rowe, 10-team, 7x7 head-to-head category keeper league. Added categories are hits, OPS, quality starts, and pitcher losses. Grade the trade. I gave up Kyle Tucker, Manny Machado, and Andres Jimenez for Trey Turner, Jazz Chisholm, Alek Manoah, and Gunnar Henderson.
So, I hate giving up the stud third baseman and Manny Machado, but you are getting one of the guys I could live with there, Gunnar Henderson, in return. You're getting a high-end pitcher that you didn't have before in Alek Manoah. You're getting an upgrade at second base, Jimenez to Jazz Chisholm, and you're getting an upgrade overall, just in first-round type, Kyle Tucker to Trey Turner. So I think that's a really good trade for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I think it's an A.
A? Cool. Yeah. A's all around. This one's from Cole, Deer, Voigt, Ruzek, and Atwater.
I have no idea.
That's John Voigt, right? The spelling with the GH in there.
It looks like this is Chicago PD.
Okay.
I've never watched. I'm in a 12-team head-to-head points daily lineup league. Due to everybody's work schedules, we are forced to draft very early this year. So coming up this Sunday, March 5th, I really hope you listen to this podcast. We have only 1 week of spring training to observe players, setting aside the injury risk and whatnot that comes over the following weeks. That said, what players are worth paying extra attention to this week based only off their performance thus far? So Cole sent this question in on Monday. Obviously, we only do one mailbag per week. And so I think I just wanted to highlight players that maybe have stood out to us so far. And the ones I wrote down, Kyle Bradish, very deep sleeper. His velocity was up. Tyler Malley's velocity was up. Jose Barrios, the spin rate on his curveball was up. Andrew Painter looked pretty good in his first outing, so could have a job on opening day. Shane McClanahan, velocity was good. That's good news for his shoulder. We spoke about Jared Kelenic earlier. Mm-hmm. And Anthony Volpe, I wanted to highlight him because we're recording this Thursday afternoon. He hit a leadoff home run. He already has a couple of stolen bases in spring. He's not on the 40-man roster, but if he keeps this up, he is really giving the Yankees a tough decision to make, whether – I don't think it would come at the expense of Oswald Peraza, but I don't know what they're going to do because if Volpe just crushes it, they probably need to give him an opening day roster spot.
Sean Manaea's velocity is way up.
Yeah.
Noah Syndergaard's is way down. So maybe flip-flop their sleeper appeal. I mentioned Patrick Sandoval. Reason to be encouraged for him. I think the player who's raised his stock in my own eyes so far is Garrett Mitchell. And it's not so much that he had a 2-homer game. It's a reminder that there could be power that is unlocked there, but it's more just, it's becoming increasingly clear that the Brewers want him to be their everyday center fielder. And I wasn't totally confident in that before spring training. And if he's their everyday center fielder, you're talking huge steals potential for very low price at a position where everybody could use him in a Roto league.
All right, Chris, any standouts for you in spring training?
Adam Wainwright's velocity was down 4 miles per hour.
Yeah.
It's too early to worry too much about spring. Like Grayson Rodriguez said he made his spring debut today. He was averaging 98 miles per hour with his fastball. He said his stuff is better now than it was a year ago. Take that for what it's worth, but looks like he's going to be on the opening day roster for the Orioles. Definitely someone who I'm surprised there isn't more hype about. I know there are questions about workload and how much he's going to be able to contribute this season, but like if anyone could be the Spencer Strider of 2023, the guy who is currently arguably the top pitching prospect in baseball, sure could be.
All right, this next one's from Matt Go Cards. I play in a 6x5 Roto league that includes hits as a sixth category. Is there any advanced stat that would account for the number of hits more heavily outside of batting average? Any players that would be pushed up the most in your rankings with this high format? Chris, something that stood out to me, and I like this point that you make every year, someone like Tim Anderson, where his walk rate is lower, his batting average matters more because it's a lower denominator, I guess, or higher denominator.
Higher denominator, yeah.
Yeah, so his batting average counts for more because obviously he's not walking as much. So I think anybody with high batting average and low walk rate would do better in a league like this. So Tim Anderson, Jeff McNeil, Alex Verdugo, Luis Robert, Lourdes Gurriel, Ahmed Rosario, Nico Horner. Those were all names that I think had under a 7% walk rate last year, but really good batting average.
Luis Arias as well. I don't love adding hits as a category when you keep average because you're kind of double counting in a lot of ways. But yeah, it makes the one-dimensional batting average sources a little more valuable. I think is the best way to think about it. Someone like Gene Segura could potentially be a little more valuable in this format as well. But that profile, you're kind of slap hitting middle infielders typically.
Yeah, CJ Abrams, I think could make sense there as well. From Civilian, for the last 4 years, I have played in the Yahoo Public head-to-head most categories format, and I may have heard you guys say last year that you did not prefer that format. Which formats are your favorite to play? Also, which sites do you recommend for public leagues and prize leagues for a solo player? Well, I mean, we work for CBS Sports, right? So we've got to say CBS. Look, I like the format on CBS, the way everything's laid out. It's the first format and website that I've played on ever in fantasy. So I'm just really used to it at this point. So obviously I'm going to vouch for CBS. But yeah, which formats do you guys like playing in most?
My favorite is weekly lineups, Roto lineups, but with head-to-head categories. I could have said that in a less awkward way, but yeah, weekly head-to-head categories with full Roto lineups is my favorite because I love the strategy of having to build a Roto lineup and the choices that you have to make in that regard. I think the standard head-to-head lineup is just a little too shallow. It's a little too easy to build a lineup. You don't have to make as many trade-offs, but I like having the Roto scoring. And I like having the head-to-head aspect. I think head-to-head is the most fun way to play fantasy. I like having that aspect of it. So yeah, that's my answer. But I don't like daily lineups because I don't have the attention span to manage my team every day. That is asking too much.
Scott, if you've been trying to talk, you're muted, bud.
Okay. Yeah. No, certainly if you want to play, certainly if you want to play in like a dozen leagues, you can't have daily lineups. And if you do have daily lineups, you need to have weekly waiver runs because the constant streaming of players every day is just
that doesn't reward.
It just rewards hustle. That's all.
Yeah, it rewards being anal retentive.
My favorite format is the one I started with, head-to-head points. During the juice ball, I know during the juice ball era, I say that all the time. But it's true. It kind of ruined head-to-head points baseball because the lineups are so small and there were so many redundancies within the hitter ranks that it pretty much just became a race to the best pitchers. And that was annoying. But now that we're back out of that, I think there's a lot more different approaches you could take. A lot of people are still going to favor pitchers because they tend to score a lot. I prefer streaming pitchers in that format. And I think it is the format that most rewards following a tiers approach and really finding those scarcities and taking advantage of them and separating your team in that way. I think it's also the format that allows for ease of trading the most. And like trading is like one of the most fun parts of playing fantasy. It doesn't get analyzed a ton, but it is over the course of the season, I think the most enjoyable way of managing your team is just making trades to upgrade it. And because because there's more flexibility in the lineup, because you're not having to preserve all these various different categories, it allows for more maneuverability.
I think my favorite format is actually the head-to-head points Tout Wars League that I play in, which I've won 2 years in a row. Shameless flex. But head-to-head points, weekly lineups, salary cap / auction, and it has Roto style lineup. So it's a little bit deeper. It's 2 catchers, it's 5 outfielders, corner, middle, and it's 7 starting pitchers and 2 relief pitcher spots. So I like how deep that it goes. I like the salary cap aspect. You can get all your favorite targets, and there's a lot of strategy that goes into that as well. And then head-to-head points, which is how I started playing fantasy as well. Prize leagues, if you're looking for, I know Fantrax and NFBC are the ones that I would probably recommend most for that. This one's from Kid Bachata. Hi, Eddie, Waldo, and Weasel.
Those are the Eddie Winslow, Carl Winslow's son from Family Matters, and his friends Weasel and Waldo Geraldo Faldo.
Right. There was so much confidence in that. I love it. 10-team daily head-to-head categories with OBP, middle infield, and 4 outfield spots. Have to keep 4 of these: Jose Ramirez, Shohei Ohtani, Trey Turner, Mike Trout, Yordan Alvarez, and Julio Rodriguez. My gosh.
I think the 4 to keep are Jose Ramirez, Trey Turner, Julio Rodriguez, and because it's a daily league, obviously, Shohei Ohtani. So we're leaving out Mike Trout and Yordan Alvarez. As good as
So the only thing I would say is it is an OBP league.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you could make the case for Alvarez or Trout ahead of Julio Rodriguez, especially because you already have the steals with Trey Turner and Jose Ramirez.
You could, but I wouldn't. Well, a strange thing I noticed with Trout the other day, you know what his OBP was last year? He hit over 280. His OBP,
yeah, he didn't walk very much
was
last year.
368.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he'll get back to being a 430 OPS.
There's been some weird stuff with his plate discipline the last few seasons, but it's also relatively small sample sizes across the board. So I still view him as an elite OBP guy.
This next one's from Noah Ken. What is your opinion on gatekeeping third baseman from the rest of the league? I have the 3rd overall pick in an 8-team league and was considering taking Jose Ramirez, an outfielder, and then potentially another third baseman for my corner infield spot.
So the problem is, let's say Brett Beatty and Josh Young have good seasons and Anthony Rendon bounces back. All of a sudden, this like panic about third base looks pretty silly because it's going to have enough guys. And so like, I think it is valuable and worthwhile to play the position scarcity game to a certain extent. But this is basically building your entire team around the idea that there just will not be enough third basemen. And maybe that will prove to be a valuable strategy and a good prediction. There are too many factors involved in this to play that game, I think.
I think in an 8-team league, I would worry about position scarcity less. And
yes,
just
also
take the best player in terms of their output.
I would worry about position scarcity more the shallower the league is, because you're going to feel those differences more. I mean, unless it's just unless the league itself is so shallow that you don't even get out of the shallow part of every position. But I think you do, especially at third base and the outfield. There will be some people who don't have nearly the caliber of players as everyone else, and those people will almost certainly lose because of it.
Yeah, I just think 8 teams is like, okay, let's say you double up on 2 of the really good third basemen. You get Jose Ramirez and Rafael Devers. That means there are Machado, Riley, Arenado, Witt, Bregman, I think are kind of there's a drop off there. I think there's drop offs within the drop offs, but like maybe one other team doesn't have a good third baseman. I don't know.
Yeah. I agree that this strategy isn't, I was just addressing the broader point of how much does position scarcity matter. I think you should just worry about getting the stud outfielder, getting the stud third baseman, like just getting studs everywhere and leaving other people not to have studs at wherever they don't think to do that.
All right. Next up, we have from Andrew L, 1422, 10-team head-to-head categories with standard positions, 1 catcher, 1 of each infield spot, 3 outfielders. We can keep 6, but if we do keep 6, we lose our first-round pick. I have the 10th pick. I'm keeping Trout, Trey Turner, and Devers. I need 3 more. Matt Olson, Michael Harris, Adley Rutschman, Spencer Strider, and Brandon Woodruff.
Okay. So you are going to keep, sorry, a lot of information that I'm having to reprocess here. You're going to keep Harris, right? Olson, probably, and one of the pitchers.
So I do have Olson ranked higher than Woodruff and Strider, but I think I would keep Harris, Strider, and Woodruff just to get the second starting pitcher.
They've already got Trout, Trey Turner, and Devers.
Yeah.
Particularly since it's a 10-team league, I'm thinking you're going to find enough pitchers, but I understand your point.
Yeah, it's close. I think I would go Olson, Harris, and Woodruff, but I think I'm kind of on an island ranking. No, I like Woodruff more than Strider, but it's close for a lot of people. This one's from K. Smitty, 2277, 12-team head-to-head points league. Need to keep 2. Bobby Witt in the 6th, Verlander in the 7th, Gallen in the 12th, Dalton Varsho in the 14th.
Points league. So Witt in the 6th, I don't know. I mean, there's a chance he could improve. But if he's who he was last year, Witt in the 6th doesn't seem like a great value. I think I'd go with the pitchers, actually, since it is a points league. Verlander in the 7th, Gallen in the 12th.
All right. This next one's from somebody named 5-star all fake. All right, cool. Nice. 12-team head-to-head categories need 2 keepers. Goldschmidt in the 4th, Bobby Witt in the 7th, Shane O'Mac in the 8th, Julio Arias in the 10th, Eloy Jimenez in the 12th, Vinny Pasquantino in the 14th, and Corbin Carroll in round 14 as well.
I just don't know why you're asking for permission from a podcast that you think doesn't deserve 5 stars, but that's fine. Need 2 keepers.
You got to keep Bobby Witt since it's a categories league in round 7. The other one, I'm inclined to say it's between Goldschmidt in round 4 and Carroll in round 14. So Goldschmidt in round 4 is probably only a 1-round discount, but it's for a stud bat. And so any amount of discount is not a bad idea. But Corbin Carroll could be a stud bat, and you're probably getting him twice as early, or you'd probably go in like round 7, you're getting him round 14. I think that's what I'd do. I think I'd go Witt and Carroll, and then you got a nice head start in stolen bases.
The added categories in this instance, on base percentage, total bases, make me lean Goldschmidt, just because I think he's going to be really good in those, and Carroll may not be.
Well,
not
Carroll,
to the same
like
extent.
If Carroll falls short in home runs, he's hitting a lot of doubles and triples. So I think it actually helps improve his stock too, the total bases.
Mm-hmm. It's close. I'll break the tie. I was leaning McClanahan or Corbin Carroll, so I guess the fact that 2 of us decided Corbin Carroll's worth consideration, then I think we probably would go with him. This one's from DSA 2020. Quick question on 5x5 Roto with weekly lineup locks. We have to fill 9 pitcher spots, but no starting pitcher or relief pitcher requirements. Minimum innings pitched is 1,000, but no maximum. How would you construct your mix knowing that the roster spots lock on a weekly basis?
Well, that's normal.
This is actually a rule. But yeah, we don't mention it often, but in standard 5x5 Roto with 9 pitcher spots, you can divvy them up however you want. There is normally an innings minimum. Sometimes it's 900, sometimes it's 1,000, and the point
1,000 is pretty high.
The point that I've heard, the reason that's in place is so that you can't just have 9 relievers in your lineup and wind up with really low ratios. So that's why there is an minimum innings requirement.
I think I'd make sure to get 2 solid relievers. I'm not saying they have to be one of the top 9, like you have to get Devin Williams and Jordan Romano. You don't have to go that high end, but you get one of those top 9 and get like a Daniel Bard or Camilo Doval or Alexis Diaz type to pair with him. Somebody who is in that closer spot to begin the season, and then you can fill the other 7 spots with starting pitchers without having to worry about chasing saves.
I'm 1,000 did sound high. I'm looking at our Memorial Magazine draft. Is that what we call that league?
Isn't it 900 or no?
Well,
Memorial
but
Magazine
last
league.
year, the lowest innings total for any team was 1374.
Oh, really?
So,
okay. I guess it's never been an issue. Somebody
that
falling below.
I don't know if that's
averaging 100 innings per spot. Oh, it might be including benches.
That's the question that I'm trying to figure out now. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never known anybody who's actually finished the year under the innings.
Yeah.
So I think it's pretty generous. 100. It's 100 innings per spot is 900. This would be 1,000 divided by 9, 111 innings per spot. You can't have too many relievers in those spots, bottom line, especially since so many starting pitchers these days are going like 130, 140, 150 innings.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to mess with it too much. So I'll stick with what I originally said.
If you go 6 starters or less, then you can very quickly fall behind in wins and strikeouts. So that's why you typically see 6 or 7 starting pitchers in a starting lineup in that format.
I would say it's just build it like a normal Roto league and you'll probably get there. And if not, if you're falling short of the pace, you'll know, you'll have to make some trades, but like if you're falling short of the innings pace, it probably means you're already doing pretty well in saves. So you can afford to.
This one's from GDCA 2020. I in a 12-team dynasty league and need to keep 5 of the following: Ronald Acuna, Fernando Tatis, Adley Rutschman, Bryce Harper, Spencer Strider, and Alek Manoah. So basically the question is, should you stash Harper over any of those names?
I think you should stash him over Rutschman.
With that,
Pitchers aren't as impactful overall.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, especially if you have an IL spot. If you don't, then I would not do that. This one's from Vilwalk79. Dear Frank, Brooks, and Cal.
Those are Orioles third baseman. I mean, Cal obviously played mostly shortstop, but he was a third baseman at the end.
Sure. I'm playing in a Roto keeper league with quality starts in place of wins. I can keep Sandy Alcantara for $22 and Christian Javier for $6. I can't decide if I should splurge for a third ace to fortify my strikeouts or keep more money for hitters and keep those 2 as my SP1 and SP2.
Well, you know what I'm going to say? That looks like a pretty good 1 and 2 to me.
Yeah.
And they complement each other pretty well because you get the innings from Sandy, you get the higher strikeout rate from Javier.
Yeah. So I would take care of your hitter spots where the scarcities I think are going to be more pronounced.
This one's from Andy B 1021. In a 12-team Roto league with the 10th pick in mock drafts, I keep winding up with Juan Soto and Manny Machado. Are there any concerns with making your first 2 picks from the same MLB team?
I did that in TGFBI with Juan Soto and Fernando Tatis. The thing about having 2 Padres with your first 2 picks is the Padres have a lot of really good players.
Sure do.
Like, it would be a problem if your 2 best players were from the Marlins
or the Tigers, but I don't even know how that would
happen. If you've got Ronald Acuna and Michael Harris, that's probably okay.
Yeah. Again, if they're your first 2 or 3 hitters drafted, they're probably going in the early.
There are some like fringe scenarios that could screw you, right? Like, I remember, I think it was 2004 or 2005. The Marlins just had this crazy stretch. Well, South Florida had this stretch where there was just a ton of hurricanes. And the Marlins ended up getting screwed, had to play like 28 games in 26 days. A bunch of them were on the road. The team collapsed down the stretch. Like, that kind of thing could hurt you in like real outlier fringe scenarios.
I wouldn't worry about it.
2020 especially would have been bad when like the Cardinals and Marlins both like lost half their teams to COVID. That's less of a concern now. So like
it's act of God stuff that you're worrying about,
like
basically.
There are like you could see a scenario where like there's a correlation where just the Braves just have a bad year, right? And like just something happens and your team gets kind of dragged out. Your Padres have a bad year and Soto and Machado both happen to have bad seasons but it's equally true that you could have an outlier outcome where they both have massive seasons that feeds each other and they end up having even better seasons as a result. So I don't really worry about it.
This last question is from Savvy PA. 12-team head-to-head categories, keeper league, 1 catcher, 3 outfielders, 2 utility spots. Currently keeping Sandy Alcantara in the 6th, Logan Gilbert in the 10th, George Kirby in the 11th, William Contreras in the 14th, Tony Gonsolin in the 19th, and Nick Lodolo in the 20th. Would you swap any of those for Corey Seager in the 4th, Clay Holmes in the 14th, or Oscar Gonzalez in the 14th?
Maybe Seager. I usually try and get Seager in round 5, but in a keeper league, it's hard to get things that perfect.
Yeah.
And I just I'm not wowed by the values of like Logan Gilbert in the 10th and George Kirby in the 11th.
Yeah, they'll go there.
And even if they go a round or 2 earlier, it's like, I don't know. I just don't value one middle round target that much more than another.
I'd throw Gilbert back and keep Seager because I prefer Kirby to Gilbert.
Also, Clay Holmes in the 14th. I don't know how scarce saves are going to be. A lot of times, the value of save sources could get inflated, and he may end up going much earlier than 14. He may go like the 10th or 11th. I might throw Kirby back and do that.
All right. Well, hope you're not a Mariners fan because we're getting rid of both Logan.
You can throw Gonsolin and back instead if you just like really love George Kirby.
Sure.
But it's, I think the point is there are going to be a lot of starting pitchers out there like those two, and there are only so many closers.
All right, we're going to wrap there for Scott and Chris. I am Frank. Thank you all for listening and watching Fantasy Baseball today. If you're watching us live on YouTube, we'll be back here later on tonight. And if not on the podcast side, we'll be back next week. Bye-bye.